Hello and welcome to Georgia Bulldogs Live. I am your host here on the Georgia Voice of College Football. I am your host, Matt Green. I appreciate everyone tuning in and everyone who is joining live this week. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. It helps out our channel and it gives you a nice little notification. Nice, convenient every time we post, every time we go live. So that'll help you out if you're one of our loyal listeners, like I know you are if you're tuning in here. So I have a guest on our show tonight here to talk the Notre Dame football and preview that Sugar Bowl matchup in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. But first, let's do a little housekeeping and let's first, I guess I need to do a quick recap because I'm a humble guy. I think everyone knows that here. I'm a humble guy, but I don't mind tooting my own horn every once in a while. And I just have to start with that Ohio State-Tennessee game. Like, that game went almost exactly like I thought it was going to go. I compared that game to the 2021 Orange Bowl with Georgia, Michigan, how there was just so much negativity. And like, I wasn't buying that the things could be as bad as people kind of made it seem and up there in Columbus, Ohio. And I felt like that rallied the team, and they just came out and played pretty much their best game of the entire season. And that's kind of how I saw that one going. It was just, there was so much negativity when it came to that game and the Ohio State fan base. It felt like the Stetson Bennett era when Georgia fans were just hating as much as they possibly could. So that's all I have to say. I don't want to go too far, but that game just went exactly how I felt it was going to go. Tennessee, there's been a lot of teams this year, with the different conference schedules that I just wasn't sure what Tennessee was truly built, what they were made of. And, you saw once again, that offense wasn't very impressive. And my specific prediction was if they get another slow start the way they did, I could see them being down 21-0. And my buddy I do the Chase Thomas podcast with twice a week, big diehard Tennessee fan, he wasn't ready for that, and I didn't have the heart. I wasn't going to text him during the game once they went down 21-0, even though I was doing a little celebrating on my end. But Tennessee fans love talking about their fans, but when you go up there and you don't win the game, you can't say you took over someone's stadium. Like, you may have won a battle, but you lost the war. So that is what it is. Ohio State got it done, and we'll get into the rest of the first round college football playoff games later. But I felt like that was the one that really stood out, and I obviously got to give myself a little bit of credit here. So without further ado, that brings me to the guest on our show, the owner of Irish Breakdown, Brian Driscoll, joining the show now. Let me add you here. Brian, I appreciate you joining me, man.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I love that little humble brag there. I got the outcome right. I picked Ohio State to win. I did not see it going down like that. I thought Tennessee's defense would make it at least a lower scoring game. You nailed that one, man. I certainly didn't get that kind of.
I appreciate it. And when I'm wrong, we don't talk about that. But yeah. I got to my own horn when I'm right about it. Yeah. But yeah, I think their defense has been good all year, but there were so many of those games where they got shut out in the first half and the offense just wasn't doing their part. It's like Heupel kind of gets the pass for being that offensive minded coach, but more times than not, this offense this year has not been very good.
Yeah, it really hasn't. I mean, I tried to explain this when we were doing our breakdown. Like, their numbers look decent because they scored so many points in those first three games against nobody, and then put 56 up on UTEP. But if you look at what they did in SEC play, what they go over 30 like twice, right? Mississippi State and Vandy, and then they spotted Vandy a 17-0 lead. I said in our show, one thing I did say is if you do something like that against Ohio State, you're going to get rolled. But I honestly did not see that kind of start where Ohio State just made that defense look like it was nothing in that first quarter.
No, absolutely. And I even said, I think Kent State at one point was like Ryan McGee's like literal number one in their bottom 10. Like, I think Kent State may have been the worst team.
There's no question. They went 0-12 and they only had two games decided by less than 2 touchdowns. And it was against I can't remember who. One of them was against somebody really bad. The other one was against a 1AA team who's not even good. Like St. Francis. They're terrible. Yeah.
I know Kent State was the one where they dropped like 60 in the first half. That's when I came and talked to my buddy. I was like, I've heard of you've heard of the whole, was it Cumberland College that Georgia Tech beat like 220-0? Yeah. I'm convinced that never happened because that Tennessee team scored 65 in like the first half. And that's the fastest I've ever seen anyone score points.
Yeah.
Not sure how 200 ever happens, but we won't get hung up on Tennessee here. We're talking about the teams that are still in the college football playoff in the quarterfinal, and that's the Georgia Bulldogs and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish in the Sugar Bowl. And so before I start asking you some questions and everything, I got to set the scene for this game. And this is the fourth meeting all time between Georgia and Notre Dame. Georgia is 3-0 with those first two. Well, I'll go game by game because this is actually not the first time that Georgia has had their backup quarterback making his first career start against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. If you go back to that 2017 game with Jacob Eason getting hurt in the season opener versus App State that year, and Jake Fromm made his first career start in South Bend when Georgia actually took over a stadium. No disrespect to you, sir.
I was there.
The game if you're going to claim you took over the stadium, right?
Yeah, they did something Nebraska started back in 2000. So.
Oh, did Nebraska take over the stadium?
Yeah, back in 2000. Okay. Yeah, I mean, for everybody that says Notre Dame's an irrelevant program, they sure do like to spend a lot of money to make sure they can go watch a game there. You know,
right?
So that's kind of how it was.
And Georgia fans too, they talk about it like it's like the greatest weekend of their lives, like because they went to Chicago.
That's what college football is all about, man. It was like two fan bases treating each other with respect. You know, like myself and a lot of Notre Dame fans that went down to Athens 2 years later, same thing in return, treated with a great deal of respect. And there's a fun banter and all that, but it really was a great weekend. It was a great college football weekend.
For sure. And the Georgia fans, they were in Chicago. Like you saw videos online of them calling the dogs like in Wrigley Field. Like they showed out and all that. And that's one thing I was going to say, because this is kind of a brewing like little low key rivalry. But from what you heard, like every Georgia fan that went up to Notre Dame was like, couldn't have been more complimentary of the fans and everything they dealt with. And it just seemed like just kind of a cordial rivalry that's kind of brewing here. Kind of like, I don't know how much you're aware of the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. Vince Dooley, Georgia's all-time great coach, played at Auburn. Pat Dye, Auburn's all-time great coach, played at Georgia. There was just this like kind of, they're just kind of two teams that they hadn't won national championships regularly. They were just really good programs. But it was that 2010 game with the Cam Newton and Nick Fairley, like a fight almost broke out. Ever since then, Georgia-Auburn has been like a fierce rivalry. But for the most part, it was always kind of a respectful one.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame's got some intense rivalries, but it's the ones that they play a lot. You look at Clemson and Notre Dame have developed a really nice little rivalry in the last 10 years. You know, you had the 15 game down at Clemson that Notre Dame lost on a last-second 2-point attempt to tie it. They lost in the playoff game in 18, beat Clemson at home in 20, then lost them in the ACC championship game in 20, beat Clemson in 22, lost. And there's just been this nice little rivalry, but it's a respectful rivalry. You know, it's like, hey, look, we appreciate your program. We know what beating you means, and Clemson fans understand what beating Notre Dame means. And so I hope that Georgia and Notre Dame can continue that. We'll see how that goes. But you know, it's also interesting because it is a rivalry that had in 100 years had one game. In the 1981 Sugar Bowl had one appearance, and now in the last 7-8 years we're going to see this is the third edition of it. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, exactly. And that especially for like the Georgia heard all about 1980. Like no one remembers the 1942, right? We get credit for that one too. But the 1980 is what the fans, rival fans trolled Georgia for the longest time because it had been so long since they last won a national championship. But yeah, we're seeing another Sugar Bowl with Georgia and Notre Dame in New Orleans. Like there's just a lot of history here. And I would say that 2017 game was kind of I would say a program changing win for Georgia in terms of kind of the fan base made a big deal about going up there and everything. But then, you just go on the road and beat Notre Dame. Georgia, I think, was preseason like top 15, 20 or so that year. And then they make the run and go to the national championship, win the SEC that year. Like it was really what kind of springboarded them, sprungboard. I don't know what the past tense of springboard. But it was just a massive win from that perspective. And then the 2019 game, like you've heard people in Georgia's athletic department administration talk about like, even with all the national championships and stuff Georgia's won in recent years, playing for SEC titles, that Notre Dame game in 2019 was kind of the most special moment of this Kirby Smart tenure because of just what it meant for like the city of Athens and like the national stage, national spotlight being on Georgia. And college game day and the first game where you put in the new fancy lights and everything. Not a lot of night games too.
Which was cool to be there for that, by the way. That was the first time I'd been in a stadium where they did kind of that end of the third quarter, turn out the lights thing. That was actually pretty cool to be there for that.
Yeah, it's awesome. Tennessee, I actually wasn't at that one. The Tennessee game this year, I was at that one to see all the lights and everything. It definitely gets the people going, right?
Yeah.
But don't tell Alabama fans. They'll tell you we stole it from them. So that's
Alabama
been an ongoing.
Alabama
ongoing
fans are
contest.
what people accuse Notre Dame fans of being. The Alabama fans think they kind of invented everything, and that's what people accuse Notre Dame fans of. Like, no, that's Bama. That's what Bama fans are.
100%. Like you see Georgia fans, or you'll see Georgia players post on their social media that they got their care package from Georgia, and then Alabama did it first. It's we're used to it down here. They think they run things down here.
Yeah,
and they did for a while, to be fair.
Yeah. There's no doubt. I mean, look, I got nothing but respect for what Alabama's done on the football field. It's just kind of funny with the way that some of their fans kind of view things, and then the only thing you say is like, yeah, you might have beat you now, but how many wins did Bear Bryant have against Notre Dame? And then they get real quiet.
Do you have that stat?
The answer is 0.
0? How many times did they play?
Let's see here real quick. I can look it up. He had a really tough time against let's see here.
It's not like me. I'm over here of North Georgia alum.
No.
We claim being undefeated because we don't have a football team.
It was like Georgia's like, we've never lost to Notre Dame. I'm like, you guys played each other once. So he was at Bama from 58 to 82. So if you look at the rivalry between Notre Dame and Alabama, they played in 73, 75, 76, and 80. So he was 0-4 against Notre Dame.
0-4. That's
two regular
that's
season
solid
games.
Sample size right there.
Two regular season games, and then the Notre Dame beat them in the 73 Sugar Bowl, and that won Notre Dame a title. They beat them in the Orange Bowl in 75, and then of course they beat them in the regular season in South Bend in 76 and down in Birmingham in 1980. Bama has won 3 of the last 4, but none of those were coached by Old Bear. So
yeah, at least that was it the Rose Bowl that was played in Dallas?
Yeah,
because of COVID.
Still weird. I don't even call that. They played the playoff.
It wasn't the Rose Bowl.
It was in the freaking Rose Bowl.
Texas.
I mean, the Rose Bowl means something. It's like the name of the stadium is the freaking Rose Bowl. So it's whatever.
Yeah, and then the national championship, 2012. Is that the
2012?
Are there more that I'm forgetting?
No, those are the only 2. They played in 2012 and 2020, and then they had a home and away in the 80s. 86, Alabama beat Notre Dame down in Birmingham, and then in 87, Notre Dame beat them pretty convincingly in 1987, and they didn't play again until the 2012 BCS game, and then of course the playoff game down in Dallas in 2000 and end of the 2020 season.
Well, I'm falling victim to it right now, making this about Alabama. This is not all about them. We're gonna have to move on before they get a bigger head than they even already have. But yeah, it's funny how now the third time under Kirby Smart that Georgia's facing Notre Dame, like somehow the stakes have just kind of gradually increased each time these teams have met. But the first thing I'll ask you is, how are you feeling about the 8:45 kickoff?
I think that's ridiculous. I mean, it's like, come on, guys. There's no reason to have the games. Like, why start the game at 1, 5, and 8:45? It's just absolutely ridiculous but I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. But it just like, because I mean, if you have kids, you have young kids. I mean, gosh, kickoff won't be till about 9 o'clock. The way these things go, and then you got a million commercials. The games are getting over midnight after midnight. So, that's pretty ridiculous. But hey, look, you get this opportunity to play on the stage. You welcome it no matter what time the kickoff is. But I'd rather be doing that than playing at 1. I mean, I do kind of like the idea that it is the prime time game. It is the big game. It is, I believe, the biggest game of the quarterfinals, simply because it is more of a unique game than Ohio State and Oregon, because we've already seen that game get played this season. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
No, that's fair. I think it's probably the one that people are giving the lower seed the best shot to win. Although I guess I take that
back.
Ohio
State's
State and Texas are we might all get the lower seeds in all these games, since Texas and Penn State are technically the lower seed. So disregard that.
Yeah, Texas is a lower seed. Yeah, that's right. And they're I think a 2-touchdown favorite as well. So it'll be of the two, I mean, I actually think that there's a contingent of people that think Notre Dame's going to win this game. There's some that don't. I think it's about the same between Ohio State and Oregon. You know, we'll see it. I just hope they're good games. That's the big thing for me.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully we get some better games than we got this past weekend. Like, what do you think is like the overall confidence level of Notre Dame's fans coming into this one right now?
It's a very confident football team. I mean, you look at where these two teams were. You talked about the 2017 matchup and the 2019 matchup. Those programs are very different places than they are now. Georgia obviously has taken another big jump since then, winning 2 titles. And Notre Dame is a much different team now than they were back then. You know, a more talented team top to bottom than they were back then. Is that going to be enough to make another deep run and beat a team like Georgia and kind of climb over that mountain that they haven't been able to climb, beating a Georgia, Bama, Ohio State type program, which they haven't been able to do in the last, 15 years or so. And that's something that we're going to find out. But, I think the confidence level is Notre Dame fans believe, even with all the injuries that they've had, that this is still a team that gives them their best chance to win a game like this as opposed to in the past where, 2012 against Bama, you needed a bunch of breaks to go your way to have a chance to win that football game. When you look at playing Bama in 2020 and you're talking about one of the corners that started for Notre Dame that game has transferred out because he was all the way down to like third string. He'd gotten beaten out by just better players, and the roster's a whole lot different now. And so I think that's part of where that confidence comes from is seeing that. And then watching this Notre Dame team the last couple of years win some big games, which they really haven't done a whole lot of, beating Clemson by 21 a couple of years ago, going down on the road and beating Texas A&M. And of course, this is a team that's won 11 straight games. And so I think there's just a lot of confidence. And Notre Dame hasn't really played a lot of close games this year. Closest game they really played was a 7-point win over Louisville, where they led for over 52 minutes of the game. And then, of course, the USC game was somewhat close, but Notre Dame never only team that USC led in the fourth quarter of every game they played this year. They never led at all against Notre Dame. So I think that's where a lot of the confidence comes from Notre Dame fans. But Notre Dame fans also respect the heck out of Georgia and understand, what a win like this would mean for the program. So I think there's a lot of optimism and excitement about that too, is can you get over the hump? That's the big thing for Notre Dame. Can you beat a program like that? Can you beat one of the elite programs, one of the tier 1 programs? And they haven't been able to really do that with any kind of consistency the last 15 years. Because, let's be honest, the 2 Clemson teams they beat, those weren't you had in 2020, you beat them without Trevor Lawrence because he had COVID, right? In 2022, that was a good Clemson team, but it wasn't a great Clemson team. It was a 10-3, lost to Tennessee.
Before you go on, that's the game where I saw DJ Uiagalelei play, and I was like, I've never seen that guy play again. I've never seen that guy play again. I thought he was going to be a superstar.
Nope. That's the best he ever did. Was the second career start. It was the best game he ever had in his life. Yeah.
But I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You're good. I was just saying, those Clemson teams were not like we saw Notre Dame play Clemson later that year with Trevor, and they got smashed. Yeah. So this is that mountain that Notre Dame has to climb. Is can you beat one of those tier 1 legitimate championship caliber programs, not a championship caliber program from past years that's not that anymore, like Clemson was, but a team that is in their prime, so to speak. And they almost did it against Ohio State last year. They almost did it against Georgia in 2019, but almost doesn't do anything, right? The Brian Kelly era of telling people, well, we didn't lose to Bama as bad as so-and-so team did. That stuff's over with now. It's now it's time to start winning those football games.
Yeah, and that Georgia, let's hope Georgia's not another example of one of those that's not at that elite level that they were at 2021 and 2022. Hopefully it was just a temporary thing and they're getting back there from a Georgia perspective. And also, the 2012 and 2020 Bama, if you have to rank those Nick Saban teams, those might literally be the 2 best.
2012 was certainly up there, and 2020.
Yeah, that 2020 team was just, you could have had 3 different guys win the Heisman Trophy. I don't know, you could have convinced
2020 is such a weird year because you don't really know how good teams really were that year because of COVID and because of all the nonsense. You couldn't play out of league. It just is it a surprise that the only year? Yeah, just the only year A&M was good was the COVID year. You know what I mean? You just look at all those things. It's just I've kind of blocked that whole year out. It just was such a weird year. But that 2012 Bama team was pretty excellent. And and again, like I said, Georgia and Notre Dame played 2 very competitive games in 17 and 19. And Notre Dame had chances to win each game. They had the ball with less than 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter with a chance to win the game in both games and couldn't get it done. And now it's, for Notre Dame, it's about can you make those plays in those clutch moments to get it done? Jake Fromm did. Brandon Wimbush couldn't in 2017, and then Jake Fromm did, and Ian Book couldn't in 2019. And that's what it's going to come down to. Is Riley Leonard different, or is this just more of the same?
Yeah. And so what would you say is the team? Because I think most people, for one, I was jumping on the Notre Dame bandwagon after that first week week one win over Texas A&M. Just the way they did it was just so gritty, and kind of we see this three-headed monster in the backfield. And obviously Riley Leonard's continued to be kind of a low-key workhorse, him and Jeremiah Love in the running game. But what do you think is the game that kind of most like closely represents a team that compares to Georgia in terms of who Notre Dame's played this year?
Well, I don't know that they've played a team like Georgia, to be honest with you. I don't know that I could look at it. You could say, okay, well, this team has a defensive line similar to Georgia, and this team has a run game similar to Georgia, or a pass receiver similar to Georgia. I don't know that there's been any team that's kind of had that whole package, which is why Georgia is where they are. I mean, defensively, I'd say A&M's probably the closest from a front four type of standpoint and a linebacker type of standpoint. I think Georgia's offensive line, and there's some similarities between their offensive line and A&M's, although I'd say A&M runs the ball a lot better than Georgia did this year. We'll see if that changes with Gunnar Stockton at quarterback, who brings a little bit of a different running element to the table than I think that we saw from Carson Beck, who's a good athlete, but he's more of a scrambler. I mean, anybody that's watched Gunnar Stockton's high school film knows that kid can legitimately run the football in ways that you see from, people like Riley Leonard and Jalen Milroe. Not that he's the kind of athlete, but just as far as you can do some things with him as a designed runner, read zones, quarterback power, things like that. But receiving cores, the one thing they have faced is they've faced some very good receiving cores this year. Obviously, Louisville had a very good receiving core. USC had a very good receiving core, and Indiana pretty good receiving core. But it's going to be different. They haven't faced anything like what Georgia has size and power wise on defense since really that opener against A&M.
Yeah, A&M was kind of the team I was trying to think of, because the other aspect is I don't know what to expect for Georgia's offense. I mean, does Carson Beck being out, does that give you more confidence in Notre Dame getting a win? No,
it's kind of funny. Well, number one, Notre Dame's going to be playing without their star defensive tackle who got hurt against Indiana. He's out for the rest of the year. And Riley Mills, they lost their All-American cornerback Benjamin Morrison midway through the season. So, Notre Dame's been playing great defense all but one game this year, but the USC game. But they're a beat up group. But I actually kind of felt, I said this on our show after the the SEC title game. I said this is what Georgia should have been doing all year. Like what they did in the second half against Texas is what they should have been doing all year. You got a big physical offensive line. You don't have great receivers. You've got some athletes at receiver, but you don't have great receivers. You don't have Brock Bowers. You don't have Ladd McConkey. You don't have I'm trying to remember the name of the kid that they had that went to Texas. I always forget his name.
A.D. Mitchell.
A.D. Mitchell, right? You don't have that kind of player. Dylan Bell's a good player, but he's been banged up a lot. Arian Smith is fast, but he's more of a track guy than he is an actual football player in a lot of ways. You should have been a team that was building around the run game and then, having your pass game be the complement to that. And I actually think this is going to force Georgia to kind of go back to what they really should have been all year. I think they were trying to replicate what they were last year. But again, you don't have Brock Bowers. You don't have Ladd McConkey and some of those guys. And I just felt they didn't lean enough into their ability to be a power running team. And you asked your big physical linemen to be pass blockers. And I don't think that's where their strengths are. I think their strengths are when they can be more geared towards running right at people. And so, but at the end of the day, both of these teams are banged up and missing great players. It's going to be about, who's able to overcome those the most.
Yeah, I always compare Arian Smith to the platoon outfielder that is forced to play every day. It's like, look, it's not this guy's fault that he's your best receiver. He's out here doing it. It's Georgia's fault that you don't have receivers better than Arian Smith. But it's like this guy, he is what he is. He gets open more than anybody else. Unfortunately, he's just dropping a lot of those. But yeah, I kind of wonder the same. And there's so much negativity around Carson Beck this year among the Georgia fan base. And he was playing really poorly for the middle stretch of the season, but I feel like he really started to come along as the season went. And I mean, you have a team that's got a bad run game and they lead the nation in drops. and they win the SEC. Like,
Yeah.
I think Carson Beck deserves a lot of credit for keeping that team afloat as long as they were. But like you said, I think Georgia, if there was a team that was able to change their identity and all of a sudden just become a run team, it wouldn't shock you if it was the Georgia Bulldogs with the way they recruit the running back position and the offensive line position. And they've gotten more healthy at the running back position over these last 3-4 weeks too. ETN kind of had to gut it out to play in that Texas game.
I mean, that's kind of what you need, right? I mean, you need those guys to get back on track. You've got Trevor Etienne, you've got Nate Frazier, you got Branson Robinson's out, right? He's been hurt, correct?
I don't think he's going to be back. Roderick Robinson has played a little bit, so I think he should be healthy.
But you got Nate Frazier, you got Trevor Etienne. They're grinded out type of players. You look at Gunnar Stockton. He's a thick built, like I said, a kind of a fullback type. The guy we compared him to is as sort of a body type and what he was in high school is a lot like the kid that Army had at quarterback this year as a runner. Now he's obviously a better passer than that kid is, but as a runner that he built more like a fullback. So I think it's going to change how they run. And that's something Notre Dame's going to have to be prepared for look, they're not going to reinvent their offense. They're not just going to go from being like an air raid team one week to the triple option the next week. Right. But within who they are, you're going to see some adjustments and some wrinkles and some different things that they're going to try to throw at Notre Dame. And that's one of the good things that Notre Dame does have going forward. There's a lot of advantages of being an independent. One of them is you do play teams from all types of different leagues. And one week you're playing an air raid team, the next week you're playing a pro style team, the next week you're playing a triple option team. You've had to be prepared for a whole lot of different type of offenses. And I think that should help them be prepared. But but this is a really good Notre Dame defense, even with all the injuries. It's still a very young but very talented Notre Dame defense, and they're going to try to ride on that. But at the end of the day, this game is going to be determined by whether or not Notre Dame can get anything going with their offense. And Georgia's going to have a very simple goal. We're going to try to stop the run. You're going to have to beat us throwing the football. Can Notre Dame still try to run the ball effectively, which some teams have? Look, let's be honest about something. For the last 3 months, everyone has tried to stop Notre Dame's run game. No one's been able to really do it for the last couple months. Can Georgia be the difference? And if they are, can Notre Dame's quarterback and their receivers and their tight ends step up and make enough plays against what I think has been a very inconsistent Georgia secondary this season and take advantage of it? And that's because one thing I've said is the secondaries in the SEC this year were not very good. And you've seen a little bit of that. I mean, you saw what happened to Texas against Clemson's secondary receivers. You saw what happened to Tennessee against Ohio State's receivers. But Notre Dame's not built at receiver like those teams. They don't have the talent at receiver that Clemson has. They don't have the talent at receiver that Ohio State has, nor does anyone else in college football with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka. But that's what they're going to have to do is try to find some balance and make sure they can still do what they do best.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you never want to lose your starting quarterback, but I think if Georgia could do it, they picked like the absolute perfect time. Like you get not in terms of being the Texas game, but at least it was at halftime. You get an entire half to kind of prepare for this guy to be the guy.
Well, look, let's not
design a game plan for
him.
Yeah.
Let me say this before I got to run because we have a show coming up at 8:30. But let's not forget the first year of the 4-team playoff. There was a team that went into the playoff whose starting quarterback got hurt in the last game of the regular season. And then they had to go in with the backup in the Big Ten title game, won that game, beat Bama in the semifinals with their backup quarterback, and then beat Oregon in the championship game. I'm obviously talking about Ohio State, who had to put Cardell Jones in the game. And what did they do in those 3 games? We're going to rely on the run game. We're going to run the football, play great defense, and then our quarterback just has to take some shots and hit a couple throws down the field. And that's what they asked them to do. They adjusted. They changed how they went about it. And, of course, they had Ezekiel Elliott at running back. That helps, right? But that's what they did. They had to not reinvent themselves, but they had to adjust who they were and what they had been doing. And they were able to do it enough to go, ride it all the way to the title. Could Georgia be that way this year? We'll find out. But they're going to certainly have a tough test on January 1st, just like Notre Dame's going to have a tough test. It's 2 really good football teams.
Yeah, we will find out. It should be a good one. And I will be coming to you with a post-game one in the AM. So who knows when that game's actually going to end. But Brian, I appreciate you joining. How can the people find you?
Irish Breakdown. So on YouTube, whether it's podcast, whatever podcast feed you use, obviously our YouTube channel, you can go to Irish Breakdown. You can also check out all of our written content at irishbreakdown.com.
All right. Thanks so much, Brian. Enjoy your Christmas and your holiday weekend.
Same to you. Merry Christmas.
Thanks. All right. Well, that was Brian Driscoll from Irish Breakdown. You just heard talking about that Sugar Bowl matchup here in what we got, like 8 days, I want to say. Here we are on the 23rd. I don't know. Math is escaping me. This time of the year, this is 9 days away. This time of the year, the days just all start to run together. But I mean, I think you heard Brian talking about Notre Dame. I think there's a lot of reasons for Notre Dame to be confident when it comes to this matchup with Georgia. I think you saw Notre Dame, I want to say from a betting perspective, start as a 1-point favorite, and I think Georgia is now up to a 1.5-point favorite. So that one has flipped in like the first day or two since they've posted that line. So it'll definitely be an interesting game. I really do wonder how Gunnar Stockton impacts this game. Like, obviously he's going to be have a huge impact on this game. He's the quarterback in the game, but just in terms of how he affects everyone else in the game, because Georgia has been a subpar running team all season long. Georgia has been a team that's dropped passes all season long, and so you just wonder, maybe a different guy's throwing it. Maybe he's, I don't know, maybe he's throwing a little more catchable ball. Maybe he's lobbing it up there. It's a little softer for the guys. I don't know. You kind of saw that, I think, what was it, when Mike Vick left the Falcons? Like, Matt Ryan didn't have the arm Mike Vick had, but just throwing a little more catchable passes. I'm not sure how that pertains to Carson Beck and Gunnar Stockton, but I don't know. You could see something like that. Maybe guys are just having to respect the quarterback's legs so much in terms of in scrambling in the pass game, that maybe he starts to get some open lanes to throw that Carson Beck wasn't getting to throw. And I think specifically in the run game, I think you're definitely going to see the running backs get some run lanes that they wouldn't have gotten if the defense is not worried about that quarterback keeping the ball himself. Like Brooks Austin, who covers Georgia football, the film guy, I believe is what he goes by. He did a great breakdown of Georgia's running game and how it changed with Gunnar Stockton running the show. So that's my biggest thing. There's a lot of people that are talking about Georgia like they're a known commodity. Like, I've heard so many people just talk about Gunnar Stockton like what he is and what he isn't. It's like, this guy's never made a start in college football, and he's played one half of meaningful football, and it was against a team who a lot of people think is the best defense in college football, the Texas Longhorns. And I wouldn't really argue with them if you said, if you told me you thought Texas had the best defense in college football. They've been elite for most of the season. I kind of question the schedule that Texas has played. So, I mean, there is that, but that defense, you can tell they're dudes all over that side of the ball, whether it's the defensive line, the secondary. I would say probably the best secondary I've seen in college football this year. So Texas is a really good team, and that's who Gunnar Stockton faced. So the fact that we have a half of football and a couple plays in overtime before Stockton took that big hit and knocked him out, you saw Georgia play winning football on the fly, mind you. Like, they were thrown into the Gunnar Stockton was thrown into the fire against Texas in that SEC championship. Now he's got 3-4 weeks to prepare for that game. I imagine Georgia and Mike Bobo, they're going to find a way to, design an offense around Gunnar Stockton's legs. Like, people kind of want to compare it to Stetson Bennett, I guess, just the player type and things like that. But, like, don't get it twisted. Gunnar Stockton was a higher ranked recruit than Carson Beck coming out of high school. Your high school recruiting ranking isn't everything, like, but it is something. Like, there's a lot of people. This guy's like a top 100, top 150 player coming out of high school. Like, he is big time, and his legs are a legitimate weapon. And you saw when he ran for that first down early on in the game, like, he got up in the defender's face. Like, he's built a little bit different than Carson Beck, and that might not be a bad thing in terms of, how Georgia wants to play, the certain style of football. So you look at if Georgia brings the defense that they played against Texas both times or against the Clemson. That was one question I had for Brian, my Notre Dame guest that was on earlier, was kind of who on Notre Dame's schedule kind of can prepare them for the Georgia game. Like, and not even to rub it in like they haven't seen anything like Georgia, but just legitimately asking. Like, I don't really know if there's a team that you can really stack up and say that's a team that's going to attack Notre Dame the way Georgia is going to. I think Clemson is probably the most similar team that I see in terms of having they weren't a very good defense this year, but they were solid. I would say not as good as Notre Dame's defense. But in terms of Cade Klubnik, an athletic quarterback, and a solid running game, like I think they're going to attack Georgia in a similar way. But I mean, that's also, we're sitting here on December 23rd. That's back on, what was that, August 30th? Like that's the first game of the entire football season. And can we expect that type of performance? Is Georgia even that type of team now here in week, whatever you want to call this? We were week 14 and now we're, I don't know. I've lost track of the weeks. I guess it would be like week 18. So that's got to be like what, 16, 17 weeks away, or in the past, I should say. So, but that's kind of what I see them. I think the Clemson game is similar, and I'm not saying that Georgia's gonna go out and beat them 34-3. I'm just saying Georgia's gotten similar looks to a Notre Dame. I think you could compare a Georgia Tech team that, we saw what Georgia Tech did to this Georgia defense, just ran all over them. Haynes King looked like the best player in college football that night playing in Sanford Stadium. And Georgia's had, an unfortunate pattern of making a couple of guys look like Heisman Trophy winners, whether it's Jalen Milroe or Haynes King, probably Jackson Dart for that matter. Like, Georgia's given up some big time performances to quarterbacks this year. But I also, I personally think, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I personally think Haynes King is a better player than Riley Leonard. I think he's a more dynamic passer, and he's also kind of a power runner. Like, Riley Leonard is a very good runner, but I think he's a kind of a different type of runner than Haynes King is. But that's not to say that he couldn't have every bit of the success that Haynes King had against this Georgia defense. And you also have Jeremiah Love, 1,000-yard rusher. Like, you saw what he's capable of with his 98-yard run in that SMU game, or in the Indiana game for Notre Dame. So, just looking at this game, I appreciate everyone chiming in here in the live chat. The real Raz chiming in here. If he's such big time and so much of a bigger recruit than Carson Beck, why is he the backup? LMAO. Well, because that's how college football works, sir. You can have 2 or 3 future NFL players on a roster, but they're stacked up. That's how you want to build it in a college football team, so that you're just having big time recruits after big time recruits. And as soon as one guy graduates, goes pro, you got another former big time recruit right behind him. So, and that's not to say that that Gunnar Stockton is better than Carson Beck by any means. I think there is a portion of the Georgia fan base out there that's kind of talking like, oh, good riddance, Carson Beck. Like, we're going to be better without Carson Beck. Gunnar Stockton fits the style of this team better. Like, I'm not saying that can't potentially be true, that Gunnar Stockton's style does fit what this team turns into in the college football playoff if they make a run. But let's just not forget what Carson Beck did for this team for the first 12 games of the season. Like, he did not have a lot of help. The running backs were banged up all season. The running game was not good. We lead the nation in drops. Like, so if your receivers are dropping the ball and your running backs aren't having a lot of success running, that leaves a lot on the quarterback. And, this offensive line, as big time as they were supposed to be, has ever many 4- and 5-star recruits that are on that group right now. Like, they haven't been that great. So, I think Carson Beck deserves a lot more credit for how good of a season he had. But I really mean to bring that up because Stetson Bennett was a walk-on, and Stetson Bennett absolutely overachieved like crazy what people thought he was going to be coming out of high school. But that's just to say this guy isn't some scrub that, oh, who knows what's going to happen. And Stetson wasn't a scrub either, but you're not turning to a walk-on. Like, Gunnar Stockton is a big time recruit, and potentially he could be a good college quarterback, and he also could be not very good, and we have no idea what this Georgia offense looks like come January 1st. So I tend to be a little confident because at least he's got that half against Texas where he showed he can play winning football. I think there's a lot of college quarterbacks that can be limited, and you can kind of design a system around them. And if this running game, if Nate Frazier and Trevor Etienne get this running game going like they were against Texas in that second half, like I think he's gonna have to do a lot less in the passing game. So I think that remains to be seen, but it'll be interesting to watch and see what Georgia can do against this Notre Dame team. So everyone, a lot of activity here in the live chat. Got a bunch of people watching live. I appreciate all of you chiming in. I'll respond to any people I can. Let's see here. Let's see. The real Raz, come back at me. Comparing the talent around Stetson Bennett versus the talent around Gunnar Stockton right now is laughable. Said so yourself. Irish by a million. Yeah, I think this supporting cast is definitely not as good right now in 2024 as it was around Stetson in 2021 or 2022. Brock Bowers, best Georgia offensive player since Todd Gurley, as far as I'm concerned. Probably top 1 or 2 Georgia offensive players in my lifetime. Brock Bowers was different. That was a loaded receiving core. And you saw even in the running game wasn't even great under Stetson, but you see how good James Cook is in the NFL, like Zamir White, like there was a lot around Stetson for sure. But Georgia also doesn't have to be as good as they were in 2021 or 2022 to win the national championship. So that there is that. Georgia doesn't have to play against a team with Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and Trayvon Walker to win the national championship this year. It's one thing Brian Driscoll, my guest, said 2014, the first 4-team college football playoff, we had Cardell Jones in Ohio State, which obviously was a loaded supporting cast too around that backup quarterback, and that third string quarterback. And you saw what 12 gauge himself, Cardell Jones, did, and Ohio State made that amazing run. So anything can happen. I would just say the most shocking result, I would say Georgia coming out and having a really good running game. That's not the most shocking result, right? Like this is kind of the DNA of this team, or of this program, I should say. And the last couple years, they've kind of strayed from that because they just haven't had as good of running games. And Carson Beck was also leading the SEC in touchdowns the last couple years too. It was a dynamic passing game, and so that's just what they've done. Georgia's tended to be a balanced offense. So my overall thoughts on this game, I feel like it's too early to give a prediction. I'm still 10 days out, 9 days out. So I'm not going to give a prediction for this game. Not just yet. Well, I don't know if I'm coming on here again. Let's give a prediction right now. Let's do it right here now for the people. I think like I'm saying, I think Georgia, if there's a team that can change their identity over the course of the season to now, I think it's the Georgia Bulldogs. Like, it's funny how people talk about Kirby Smart when it comes to the grand scheme of college football. Like, if someone's making a list of the best coaches in college football, they're putting Kirby Smart number 1, and it's not really even a conversation. But when it comes to a week out basis, and we start getting in different like debates about, oh, this team versus that team, this coach versus that coach, everyone seems to always kind of go back to the offensive minded coach, and they're like, oh, I think Sarkisian, I think he's got the edge over Kirby. I think Heupel might have the edge over Kirby. And time again, Kirby Smart, in these big games, Georgia, you see the best version of Georgia's team. Like, Marcus Freeman is not an offensive guy. He's obviously a defensive guy before he became a head coach. But when it comes to Kirby Smart coach teams, like, you see how good they are when they have the long layoff. They've never lost a first round college football playoff game in the 4-team era. They beat Oklahoma, they beat Michigan, they beat Ohio State. The only game they ever lost in the college football playoff is the 2017 national championship to Alabama. So Kirby Smart is 5-1 all time in college football playoff games. You also, I mean, if you go back to the mini big time season openers Georgia's played, whether it be Clemson this year, Oregon in 2022, Clemson in 2021, even the Notre Dame game, the early season game in 2017, when Kirby Smart has a lot of time to prepare for an opponent, I think Georgia, you typically see Georgia play their best. And I think when it comes to a team like we talk about, matchups make fights. When you come to a team, like when you're going to find a team that's going to beat Georgia, it feels like it needs to be someone doing something different. Like I would say it feels like Notre Dame is like too traditional to beat Georgia. And that's to say, if we get the Georgia we've seen in recent week, like it's hard to say which Georgia defense we're going to get. Like typically, I'll say this. One of the best hot takes I ever had, I was so right that I was wrong. Because typically under a Kirby Smart team, these quarterbacks that are kind of suspect throwing the ball, but are good runners, typically those guys do nothing against Georgia's defense. Like Kirby Smart defenses in the past have just absolutely destroyed those guys. The KJ Jeffersons of the world, the Anthony Richardsons of the world. But my best hot take of all time that I was so right, I was wrong. The 2017 season, that entire season, because I can't remember right off the top of my head the specific quarterbacks, but I remember that team faced multiple quarterbacks that kind of fit that mold. And I was telling anyone who would listen, Jalen Hurts is not gonna good enough to beat Georgia. Like Alabama cannot beat Georgia with Jalen Hurts at quarterback. I said it all season, like watching Alabama play week in and week out, like this team can't beat Georgia. And I was so right that Alabama benched Jalen Hurts at halftime of the national championship. Tua comes in, we all remember it, and Georgia unfortunately did not win that national championship game. But that's how it typically used to be under Kirby Smart in these Georgia defenses. But you've seen recently these quarterbacks that can run, Georgia's had a lot of trouble with them. And Haynes King is obviously the most recent one. That's one of the reasons I felt a lot more confident going into Texas the second time around, even though a lot of people, and that's probably the reason a lot of people thought Arch Manning was going to play a bigger role, was because when the quarterback doesn't have the element of the legs, I feel like this Georgia defense can just pin their ears back. They're not worried about the quarterback run and everything. So that's one element that has to worry you as a Georgia fan, because Riley Leonard, 700 and something yards, 15 rushing touchdowns on the season. This guy is a dynamic runner. Like that's what Notre Dame is going to be. They're going to try to run the ball. That's their identity. And depending on which game you pull up against Georgia, it's different results. You look at the Georgia Tech game, you look at the UMass game, like you look at maybe the Ole Miss game. I think Georgia gave up 100 yards rushing like 4 or 5 weeks in a row before the I think it's bookmarked by the 2 Texas games. You got like 4 or 5 games in a row of Georgia just giving up 150, 200 yards on the ground. And both times they played Texas, they keep them like under 30. So I don't understand. I don't know how to explain why Georgia's run defense was so much better against Texas, other than maybe the fact of that quarterback run game really making the difference. So that's going to be a factor here for Notre Dame. But ultimately, I think this Georgia team is battle tested. You look at, unfortunately for them, Carson Beck was the guy going through a lot of those battles. But you just look at that game or look at the quarterback situation and Georgia's schedule on the season. This team has just played so many good teams, whether it's Alabama and Ole Miss, like 2 teams you lost to, of course, or it was Tennessee, or it's Clemson, or it's, whoever, like Texas, both times. Like Georgia has played more big time games than any other team in college football. And I think that's why they're going to be just more battle tested than Notre Dame, who's I would say best win of the season came last week against Indiana. And Indiana, yeah, they were a good team, went 11-1 this year, 11-2 now with that loss to Notre Dame. I don't know what their best win was, a 7-5 Michigan team. Like that was the one win they had over a ranked team this year. So I'm not just going to go on the college football death loop of who have they played? Oh, they beat them, but who have they played? And oh, they beat them. That's no one wants to hear that. But I think you still look at Notre Dame's resume throughout the season, and there's not a lot of big time wins. I would say Georgia's probably played 4 or 5 teams at least as good as the best team that are better than the best team that Notre Dame has played. While Carson Beck was the guy going through a lot of those battles, the fact that you have Gunnar Stockton go through that SEC championship game against Texas, that's getting thrown into the fire. I think ultimately Georgia does enough to win this game. I don't think it's a blowout. I'm going to say Georgia wins this one 20. I'm going to say 24-17. I think this one is probably like a 10-10 game at halftime or something. Maybe even less, just two teams feeling each other out, two teams that want to run the football. Like the possessions are going to be limited in this game. But I think ultimately Georgia will do enough to win the game. So that's how I see this one going. I'm sure every single person watching this agrees with me. But let's see. What are they saying in the comments? Let me look at this. It's all just great stuff and complimentary. The real Raz, Kirby is a good coach. I agree, but if he thinks this Notre Dame team is just another Brian Kelly team like 2020 and 2012, he's going to be shocked on New Year's. I would assume Kirby doesn't think it's like those teams because I don't think Kirby played Notre Dame in 2020 or 2012. Those were Alabama teams. I guess Kirby was. I apologize. Kirby was a DC on the Alabama team in 2021 and 2012, but he did not play Notre Dame in 2020. Did play him in 2017 and 2019, but yeah. So who knows? I don't think Kirby does think that those teams are the same. Also, I mean, I guess just speaking, just truthfully, I don't know that this team is better than some of those other Brian Kelly teams. I think Brian Kelly had 2 different teams that made the college football playoff under or 2 different Notre Dame teams under Brian Kelly made the college football playoff. So I don't know. I think it remains to be seen if they are better than one of those teams. Like they have this college football playoff win, but I mean, how many college football playoffs is Brian Kelly going to if the field is 12 teams? So that remains to be seen. All right. So I'll end it with this. Let me talk about the other college football playoff game. So I don't feel like there's too much to talk about from last week. Like I started the show by hyping myself up with my Tennessee, Ohio State prediction. So I'll toot my own horn there. But the other games like Notre Dame, Indiana was a pretty good game. I mean, it's hard to say. It was a good atmosphere. I feel like Notre Dame was giving them a fight, but or Indiana was giving them a fight, but Notre Dame ultimately just really took care of business in that one. It was 27-3 in the fourth quarter before they scored a couple of late touchdowns. Ohio State, Tennessee domination. Texas, Clemson was definitely the best game of the weekend. Clemson, if not for a couple fourth down stops, like they could have been right in that one late. And then Penn State, SMU. It's hard. It's funny because it's like it feels like SMU was completely outmatched, but at the same time, it's like if those pick sixes just changed the game, especially that first drive where Jennings had the first down on fourth down, but he chose to throw it to the end zone and the guy drops the touchdown pass, like which was behind him. But it's like there was that play and then the 2 pick sixes. Like SMU was actually moving the ball a little bit. So it's like it's kind of weird. It feels like they didn't belong in the game, and at the same time, they could have maybe showed a little better. So it didn't really go their way. So I think there's just a lot of hot takes happening about Ole Miss and South Carolina and Alabama and how bad of a job the committee did. And I don't really understand that. Like the 14 playoff had so many blowouts. I'm not sure why you thought a 12-team playoff would have less blowouts. I'm personally not a playoff expansion guy. I thought this was a great year for 4 teams. I'm not going to get into that again. You could convince me of 8. But I feel like 4 would have been just fine. We would have gotten this Georgia Ohio State game in the first round, the 2-3 seeds, 2 versus 3 seed likely. But yeah, that's just my personal opinion. Like Alabama, if Alabama and Ole Miss had lost a bunch of games to top 10 teams, like I might feel bad for you and they need to reevaluate how they look at strength of schedule and all that. But for them to get so butthurt about, oh, we're never scheduling other tough non-conference games again. It's like, well, you didn't miss out because of your non-conference. You didn't miss. You were both in the driver's seat going into like week 11 until you lost to, who was it? Florida. Ole Miss lost to Florida, and Alabama got blasted by Oklahoma. So I'm not here crying for those SEC 9-3 teams that didn't get in. They just got to do something about the seeding. Like the automatic qualifier, I have no issue with, but the seeding is just, see the teams 1 through 12 how they really are. The buys going to those conference champs just makes no sense. But I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you that this weekend. Everyone, it sounds like everyone was basically unhappy with how those first round matchups went. But in terms of the quarterfinal matchups, along with Georgia and Notre Dame, we've talked about at length. I think everyone considers Texas an obvious favorite over Arizona State, Penn State an obvious favorite over Boise State. I tend to think Penn State blows out Boise State. I could see a scenario where Arizona State can hang around with Texas. I don't really know. The Big 12 was an interesting league this year, so I'm not ruling out the idea of Arizona State giving Texas a game. I'm ultimately going to take Texas to win that one. But Oregon, Ohio State, that's the one I'm really excited for in the Rose Bowl before Georgia's game. Unfortunately, the reason why Georgia Notre Dame is kicking off so late, because the Rose Bowl will always get its 5:00 Eastern kickoff. So you get that nice sunset in like the third, fourth quarter of the Rose Bowl, which, I can't even hate on it. It's like the most majestic bowl there is. So the Rose Bowl, they can kind of do what they want, which clearly they can do what they want. But yeah, so that's the game that I'm looking the most forward to. Maybe it's a reminder to everyone that like these teams should just be in the Big 10 and Pac-12 and they can meet in the Rose Bowl all the time. That's tradition of college football, right? But they are two teams, and the two Big 10 teams that are facing off in a rematch. Oregon and Ohio State. As the second that the first matchup between Oregon and Ohio State ended, my thought was they're going to play again, and I could definitely see Ohio State beating them. And for the most part, I would say most of this season, Ohio State has underperformed expectations. Like it feels like kind of like a vintage Urban Meyer team. Like Urban Meyer teams, like I've always said this as a side note. If I have to have any coach in the history of college football coach my program, it's Nick Saban, no doubt. Week in, week out, there's no other like Nick Saban. But if I just have to have one game, I'm taking Urban Meyer. Like Urban Meyer, there's something to those Florida teams, Ohio State teams. The big games, they could get up for anybody and play with anybody. But it was just something about like you could guarantee like one snoozer a year under Urban Meyer, whether it's getting blown out versus Iowa, getting blown out versus Purdue, like the Ole Miss loss back when he was at Florida. There just seemed to be one of those a year that Urban Meyer teams kind of inexplicably don't show up. But in terms of this matchup, like this team kind of feels like that. Like they're kind of just going through the motions most weeks, although Michigan was supposed to be a big game, right? You lost to them 3 years in a row, now 4 years in a row. So maybe not every big game, but you saw against Tennessee, the big game atmosphere. They came out and they played their absolute best game of the season. And I think when Ohio State is firing on all cylinders, I think they're a better team than Oregon. I think Oregon has been the best team in college football. I'm not arguing that they should or shouldn't be number one right now. But for my money, like Travis Hunter, I'm not arguing against Travis Hunter winning the Heisman. He's like most dynamic player in college football this year. But Jeremiah Smith is an absolute freak. This dude, I've said it, I don't know how many times, he looks like Julio Jones, like right now. Like there's not many guys, we were actually talking about over the weekend. There's like a handful of guys you can remember through the years that, because as true freshmen, you see like a big time true freshman come in and you're like, oh, this guy's going to be a superstar. He makes some plays, but his body still doesn't look like a guy who's been in a D1 weight room, you know? This guy, Jeremiah Smith, showed up and he looks like an NFL wide receiver right now. Like a Leonard Fournette or somebody that just Jadeveon Clowney came right out of high school and was just ready to go to the NFL, like from their freshman year in college. And Jeremiah Smith looks like that kind of dude. So until anyone figures out how to stop Jeremiah Smith, who was playing like his third or fourth college football game the first time these teams met. Like this guy's a little more seasoned at this point, and maybe Will Howard after that Tennessee game knows to get him the ball. And you saw the way they were using him in different ways, going deep on those crosser and on those crossing routes. So I would not be surprised. I think right now I'm taking Ohio State. So I think it's going to be Texas versus Ohio State, and then Georgia versus Penn State in the Final Four of the college football playoff. That would be my personal prediction. All right. So last thing I'll end it with here. We got a few more comments. So I appreciate everyone that's tuned in live. Please like and subscribe to the channel. That always helps us out. Let's see. We got Mason McCurley here. If Georgia is playing from behind like they have most of the season, Gunner might not can throw and tempo to get back into the game. I think that's 100% a concern for this game, because I don't think Gunner Stockton. I mean, at times I say Gunner Stockton. At times I think Carson Beck is the reason why Georgia was getting in some of those holes with some of the turnovers. But there's also been those times that Carson Beck brought them back in games, and you could see the NFL throws. You can see what this guy is capable of. And also what's just not talked about enough is just how many, especially first drives of the game, are derailed by drops. I think there was like 3 or 4 games. I think it was the Alabama game, Texas, Tennessee, at least just off the top of my head. And those are 3 of the biggest games of the season where Georgia drops a first down on the opening drive of the game. In Arian Smith's case, it was one of them was like a 45, 50-yard pass. The other one was like a potential 70-yard touchdown. Like he got behind the defense in the first play of the Alabama game and he dropped it. So yeah, I think it's definitely a concern that if Georgia gets down early, that Gunner might not be the guy that can get him out of that hole if he's got to do it just throwing the ball. But I think the logic is that Georgia probably becomes a little more of a conservative team, kind of wants to limit the possessions. Maybe they're able to run the ball. If they're able to sustain drives, like that could go a long way and not getting behind by a big margin because there's not many possessions. All right. Let's see who else we got in the chat. Pablo 7. Everything points to Notre Dame finally getting the monkey off their backs and beat Georgia, similar to Ohio State utterly destroying Clemson a few years ago. Yeah, that's possible. It might. I don't know. It's everything pointing to that. I would say, I guess Georgia's the getting Georgia's backup quarterback is definitely a solid a solid get in the bracket, for lack of a better term. And I didn't definitely need a better term. I didn't voice that correctly, but you understand what I'm saying. Like in terms of just how, when you get Georgia, you're getting a team with a backup quarterback with a lot of question marks. So, that's definitely possible. So, I'll be interested to see. I think without a doubt, this is going to be a good game. It's been a good game the first 2 times these programs have faced since Kirby Smart became the head coach. So let me chime into another one. Getting in it. My bad. Wait. Just getting it 56. Carson's touch to release is elite. His checkdowns are elite. He's really missing targets like Bowers and McConkey. I think so. And Marcus Rosemy-Jack-Saint was even a guy a year ago that made a lot of tough contested catches and was a really good blocker, because everyone loves to hate on the screens. Oh, we're calling another screen. Bo's calling another screen. Georgia's screen game works so often, and it's kind of funny. No one ever complains about it when it works. Teams across college football are always running screens, so it's just kind of funny how much hate there is. But the receivers not blocking, I would say, is a reason why the screen game has not been as effective this year. And Rosemy-Jack-Saint was definitely a huge contributor in that game, in that aspect of the game. And then we got Rodney Hewitt chiming in. Go Dogs, sick 'em, woof, 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 woof. I think I couldn't have said it better myself, sir. I think we'll end it right there. So I appreciate everyone who tuned in live. Rodney Hewitt, just the best words. I couldn't have phrased it better myself. But like I said, I appreciate everyone tuning in live. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I always come to you. I'm usually here every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock after me and Matthew Miller do an SEC Voice of College Football show at 7 o'clock every Tuesday. But with Christmas Eve tomorrow, I decided to move this one up to Monday night. So I usually come to you every Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, and then I'll come to you as soon as I can really as soon as I can gather my thoughts and everything for a post game instant reaction. But every post game, I'm coming to you live for sure, so you can tune in, jump in the chat. We're gonna have a lot of fun. And that one, it's gonna be a late one. We were talking about the 8:45 kickoff. Maybe it kicks off at 8:45. It's probably kicking off at 9 o'clock. And if it lasted 3 hours, it would end at 12. So this game is probably ending closer to 12:30, 1 a.m. on January 2nd. So I'll probably be coming to you live like 1:30, 2 a.m. or something on January 2nd. But that's what I do. That's what I do for the people. You know, we gotta get in there while it's fresh, while it's hot, and get that instant reaction. So once again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe to the Georgia Bulldogs, Voice of College Football. And go Dogs.
College football is even more exciting with some action on the line. And the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now.